think the core question that one day I'm going to maybe write more about, because I really want to give anyone insight into it, is like, how do you actually speaking go from a bedroom to like building a company? Because there's a big gap there, admittedly. And it's something that I've always struggled with communicating, because it's a very like involved and detailed process. And it was at the very, very beginning of Nucleus. And so it's the thing though that I think for founders, it's most important, which is like, how do you take some sort of frontier thing and productize it? So let's go back to now this idea that there's this kind of intellectual frontier and you're building up your understanding to the intellectual frontier. As I mentioned, intellectualization is good. Having that understanding is good, but investigativeness is fundamentally not enterprisingness, right? They're very different skill sets. So to productize something, to productize science, you need a team and you need capital. So one way of actually, interestingly enough, and this is actually really like, it doesn't need to be this way, but this is the way it is, which I think is awesome. Interestingly enough, when you actually seek and build the intellectual frontier, inextricably, you identify these scientists that are at the leading or bleeding edge of the intellectual frontier. In other words, you're finding your actual future employees. Think about that. So when you read that Nature paper, who wrote that Nature paper? There you go. Right? Like literally speaking, like, hey, that might be, and here's the thing. If you go to a scientist and you say, hey, join my startup and look at my bedroom, they're going to be like, fuck off. But here's what's interesting. This is the thing that's really interesting. The scientist might have a PhD student, right? The scientist might know someone. Or what I think is actually the thing that happens is when you talk to the scientist, given that this is their investigative life work, and you don't always get lucky with this, but especially if it's something that's a little bit more applicable science, what you find is when you start talking to them about productizing it, it is such an unusual thing in academia for someone to actually come to a scientist and be like, I'm going to like work with you and like take this out of the lab and do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, L, M, N, K things and to make sure that this technology goes to everyone. That's like music to a good scientist's ears. And because they're not used to that, that's not how their brain is. And so for me, what I did is there was a scientist that was doing a lot of research on the frontiers of polygenic prediction. And I actually started emailing him to help answer a lot of my intellectual questions on genetics under a pseudonym. And what happened is we developed a relationship. And eventually I said to him, hey, I just raised some money. I actually told him that I was a student at Penn because I actually wanted to go buy his academic project, which we did actually. And I put him on as an advisor. So notice how these things became inextricable. In doing the intellectual pursuit, you get a mind map of who the important players are. And then you do what is a Kian signature, which is you put them on the advisory board to then get them as an employee. Great tactic. Because people won't join as an employee. But what you do is you say, hey, yeah, no problem. Here's a little bit of equity. Go on the advisory board. Use their name. Use their credibility, right? Keep punching up. Go back to them and say, look at this momentum. Look what we've built. Look what we're scaling fast. No scientist, when it's their baby, when it's their work, right? That scientist that's building the artificial womb that published that paper in Nature, right? Who wouldn't be like, fuck, like, I want to get in on this, right? This is my life's work. This kid really knows what he's talking about. I believe fully with this vision, right? I'm going to hop